Jamaica has places tourists never get to see. Some might think that these places are hidden waterfalls or distant rural communities, but these are promoted by off-the-beaten-path travel companies and locals. And you can find quite a few Instagram pictures and YouTube videos featuring them. But there are also places hardly anyone talks about. They happen to have an extremely important historical value, but it's just not the kind of history people want to embrace. With this episode, I would like to take you truly off the beaten path and share what happened to all sugar estates and why it is important to know about them. Let's get into it. As a tourist in Jamaica, of course I heard of the colonial past, but the existence of sugar plantations simply didn't fit the narrative and the image of Jamaica I had in my mind. Because of the media and the books I read, I had the impression that the area of plantations was nothing more than just large fields of sugarcane that were long gone without a trace. That was until I accidentally bumped into one of them. In the first year, when we relocated to Jamaica, my family and I spent some time going off-road into rural communities to explore, find beautiful places, and make new friends. On one of such days, as we were driving along the road in Trelawney Parish, my husband and kids noticed a strange old building with a large tree growing on the top of its wall. We were curious how the tree was growing from the wall, so we stopped the car and went to check it closer. What we saw inside was absolutely mind-blowing. Just look at these roots. They explained how the tree was growing on the wall, but it's the sun rays pushing through the crown of the trees that made the place look absolutely surreal. At that time, I didn't know what the building was. It reminded me of a temple in Cambodia because of the roots, but I certainly didn't expect to see anything like this in Jamaica. On top of that, the building itself had this style of architecture I had never seen anywhere in the world before. I was surprised that the place wasn't used as a popular tourist attraction or a site for some photography sessions. It looked abandoned, the gate was open, no signs, nothing. I tried to find in locals in the community to understand what's going on. I was just asking questions like, "Did you see that building and the tree? What is it?" And they were simply, "Yeah, some old ruins." Later, of course, I learned why they were so unimpressed. There are hundreds of places like this in Jamaica. Well, not with the tree on the top, but the architecture. Pretty much anywhere you go inland, you will bump into some ruins, and of course, all of them have that dark past attached, because they are former sugar plantations. That particular place with the tree is not an exception. It's Kent, which was a large sugar estate owned by the Jarrett family for about 200 years. And this is what the house looked like in 1900s before it got completely abandoned and swallowed by nature. Here is the map of Jamaica published in 1804. The dots you see here are 814 sugar estates. They covered pretty much the whole island. Obviously, they were not just fields. Most of them had a house that was built for the owner, known as the Great House, but there were a lot of other structures too. All sorts of adjacent buildings, like the kitchen, the stables, and then of course the sugar mills and aqueducts. All of them built between 1720 and 1850, thus having an important historical value, but hardly anyone appreciates it. You see, because of the colonial past, some modern Jamaicans don't want to have anything to do with it. They don't associate themselves with it. They see these historical buildings as just some reminders of oppression, something foreign that was pushed onto them. As a result, the historical places in all parts of the island are often neglected or destroyed. Believe it or not, but I can understand what's going on. Partially, but here is why. I'm originally from Ukraine, which was a part of the Soviet Union for almost 70 years, which preceded by hundreds of years of Ukraine being occupied by Russian Empire, where Ukrainians were mostly viewed as inferior, uneducated village people. When Ukraine finally became independent in 1991, the first thing Ukrainians did was getting rid of the Soviet and Russian past. Rename the streets, rename the cities, replace or destroy all Soviet monuments and buildings. As a Ukrainian, I understand the emotions, but from historic and scientific point of view, this is just so crazy. We cannot erase our history, and when we try, it only does more harm in the long run. Of course, this pattern of removing the reminders of the past we don't want to accept is present in other societies. Let me know in the comments if there is something like this going on in your home country as well. This video is not about the study of history as such, so I'm not going to go into details, but here is the thing I would like to point out. When it comes to Jamaican architecture, I've noticed it is not promoted for what it is. Quite the opposite. The subject is often avoided or presented under a different light. For example, when my kids went to school in Jamaica, this architecture was mentioned as British heritage, even though it's not really, it's Jamaican heritage. But it certainly isn't that clear, so let me share what I found out about Jamaican Georgian architecture. Georgian architecture is the name given to the set of architectural styles between 1714 and 1830, named after the first 4 British monarchs of the House of Hanover, who reigned in continuous succession during those years. The styles were based on the classical forms of early Italian Renaissance period, so we can see a lot of squares and the columns. Georgian architecture became so popular in those years because it was perceived as simple, elegant, and beautiful. One of the reasons people saw the beauty in these buildings was because of the golden ratio, which is really the relationship of one dimension to another. We see this phenomenon, also known as golden section, in nature all the time. To humans, these forms are very satisfactory and pleasing, so if beauty has a math formula, this is it. However, Jamaican Georgian architectural style is quite different from the one we find in Britain. Because although the building plans were brought originally from England and the important proportions and contribution to the beauty of the structures were preserved, significant modifications had to be incorporated to accommodate the difference in the environment, weather conditions, and availability of materials. For example, bricks were expensive. They were brought in from England as ballast, as was stone, but stone was also available locally and could be cut from rocks such as limestone. Wood was also in abundant supply and could be used. What we have as a result, upper stories of houses were typically framed in local termite-resistant wood, while the ground floor was built in stone. The layout of the building typically positioned the kitchen in such a way as to prevent the smoke and the heat from reaching the living areas. That is why the kitchen was a detached structure, lowering the risk of fire to the main building. Another unique feature of Jamaican Georgian architecture was the verandas that helped to protect openings while providing an outdoor living space from the inside, without compromising the general rectangular shape of the building. The roof above the veranda is vulnerable to high winds. That's why in many cases the beams of the porch were not connected to the beams of the house's roofing, in order to prevent damage to the roof of the main structure during hurricanes. and of course inbuilt jalousie. You know, these windows with blinds. These are typical not only for Jamaica, but even nowadays we see that many modern houses in Jamaica have them as preferred solution for windows. The uniqueness of Jamaican Georgian architecture is its emphasis on light and air, the relationship of the voids and solid. It's about symmetry, the mix of stone and wood, and the pattern of window and wall. It's not only about private homes, it's also courthouses, railway stations, churches, libraries. All of these structures were implemented to withstand heat, earthquakes, humidity, and hurricanes. They are ideally suited to the climate of the Caribbean, and this is the only place in the world where you can find this particular style of architecture, with Jamaica being the main center of this heritage. As you can see, Jamaican architecture is unique, but all of it was built by the English, right? Was it? I mean, planters were not actually building anything. In many cases, they were in Britain, rarely visiting the island. It was Jamaican people who lived right here on the island doing all the work, including the construction. Some of these Jamaican people were of African origin, others of European or Asian. Sure, they didn't identify themselves as Jamaicans back then because the concept as such didn't exist. But those people are the ancestors of most modern Jamaicans. And sure, Jamaican architecture is based on the style that came from Britain, and it was built during the English Empire. But it's wrong to view it as just British heritage, because in this case, should Italians now go to England and say, well, this part of architecture is not English heritage, but Italian because it was built during the Roman Empire by the Romans? Jamaican architecture has distinct features that were developed because of the environment in Jamaica. What's even more interesting, a lot of modern Jamaicans tend to build these large family homes that are spin-offs from Jamaican Georgian architecture. So if you ever wondered why so many houses in Jamaica have these kind of windows and corners and columns, now you know. It is very important to preserve all heritage, appreciate our knowledge of the past, because it's the only way to understand our present. There are several organizations in Jamaica that are committed to the preservation, restoration, and maintenance of Jamaica's historical buildings, monuments, and artifacts. These organizations include, but not limited to, the Georgian Society of Jamaica, Jamaica Historical Society, the Archaeological Society of Jamaica, and of course, there is Jamaica National Heritage Trust, and their website has a wealth of information about historical places in Jamaica. But when it comes to tourism, is Jamaican architecture used in any way to attract more visitors? When tourists think of Jamaica, they think of nature, people, food, but architecture is not something that comes to mind, at least not to an average visitor. It becomes especially apparent if we watch vlogs that visitors create about Jamaica. Some even suggest to skip Jamaica entirely because it has no architecture and nothing of historical value. According to them, Jamaica is all about beaches, resorts, and parties. But of course, there are other people who like to ask uncomfortable questions. For example, what happened to all those sugar plantations? No, really, are they still owned by the descendants of former planters? Are any of them still in operation or used as tourist attractions? As you might expect, most plantations went out of business by the middle of the 19th century. They were taken by the court, and some were successfully sold off at the auction to new owners. A good example of such property is Wyeth Estate that was acquired by a Jamaican family and was used to breed and raise thoroughbred horses. And now, of course, it is also open to the public as one of the biggest tourist attractions, not because of its heritage, but rather because of Wyeth Falls. However, there is a former plantation that does focus on the heritage. It's called Orange Valley Estate. The new owners got it in 1955 and created a unique open-air excursion that allows visitors to become acquainted with the property's 340-year-old history. It features the ruins of old buildings, sugar and cattle farms, and has a river running through the property. Some plantations still operate as sugar estates and produce sugar or rum. For example, world-famous Appleton rum is produced at Appleton Estate. I will be making a separate video about Appleton later, but just so you know, an excursion to Appleton Rum Factory is one of the best integrations of Jamaican nature, history, heritage, and promotion of Jamaican products of top quality. Only a handful of great houses were turned into museums by new owners. So far, the best one I visited that shares a lot of history and has a wide range of authentic, genuine artifacts is Greenwood Great House. It is also one of the best preserved examples of Jamaican Georgian architecture. There is an exceptional true story behind this place and why this particular great house was spared of being burned like many others during the uprisings in 1831, and I would share this story in a separate episode. Apart from the estates mentioned, there were a few more places that have been implemented in one way or the other to be used for tourism. Like the Trial Club, a sugar plantation that was turned into luxury resort with private villas, butler services and so on. Rose Hall Great House that was rebuilt from scratch in 1960s and now used as a popular tourist attraction with a ghost story. Or Shaw Park Estate in Ocho Rios that was turned into an amazing botanical garden with a large waterfall and exciting excursion that is open to the public. These are just a few different examples of hand I can think of, but they are actually more of an exception to a general rule of what happened to sugar estates in Jamaica. Most estates didn't find new owners and in the end became the property of Jamaican government, and the land was later split into smaller pieces and sold to locals. I live in Montego Bay and it was a surprise for me to find out that we have Lilliput Estate, Spot Valley Estate, Ironshaw Estate. All of them are former sugar plantations that became residential areas. In Ironshaw you can even see the aqueduct and the mill from the main road that is called Sugar Mill Road. The sad part is, however, in most other cases, historical buildings on such land that is used for residential areas were neglected, removed, or became a part of someone else's private property and just sit there abandoned. And that's why if you go inland, there is a chance you might simply bump into the remains of this history. And that is exactly what happened to me when I saw Kent Estate, that place with the tree on the wall. As it turned out, it is owned by a Jamaican family, and I was even lucky to meet the daughter of the owner during one of the business forums in Montego Bay. I shared with her my opinion of how interesting that place was and wondered why not use it for heritage tourism. Half a year later, I was driving past the place again and was sad to see that there was no tree anymore. So I ran to see what happened and found people in the process of removing roots in an attempt to clear up the architecture. The guys doing the job probably thought I was a mad woman because I was trying to stop them, like, don't cut this. They were like, who are you? What are you doing here? This is private property. So, yeah, I had to leave. You see, the owners kind of missed the point. It wasn't the architecture alone. It was the combination of architecture and nature that made that place so special and interesting, like that temple in Cambodia. And by removing the beautiful nature part of it, they kind of destroyed its uniqueness. You've just watched an exclusive footage of a place in Jamaica that doesn't exist anymore. Now, what do you think about Jamaican Georgian architecture? Would you like to visit a historical place and learn more about Jamaican heritage? Maybe you've done so already. Please share in the comment section down below. And if you learned something new from this video, don't forget to give it a like. And we now have 10 patrons. Special thanks to all of you guys for the support, and of course our patron sponsors. Thank you so much. If you also wish to join our team on Patreon and vote on upcoming topics for this channel, please follow the link in the description, where you will also find all the references to sources for the information you've heard in this video. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Irina, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.